What happens when the one man who tried to protect his neighbors gets punished with a $50,000 fine, only for the storm he warned about to destroy every home around him? The storm that drowned the neighborhood didn't start with thunder. It began with silence, the kind of silence you get when the air is heavy, when leaves press flat against the ground, and the sky hangs low like it's waiting to crack open. By the time the first drops hit the rooftops in Marietta, Georgia, most families were winding down for the evening. Kids were finishing homework, parents were flipping through the evening news, and no one had any idea that water would soon be pushing through their basements, soaking their furniture, and swallowing their streets. But one man did have an idea. He had warned them for months. His name was Clinton Dorsey, a 44-year-old husband and father who worked as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant in Cobb County. He wasn't a man who sought attention. Most evenings, you'd find him tinkering in his garage, mowing his lawn, or sitting with his wife Denise on their back porch while their teenage son kicked a basketball down the driveway. But Clinton had learned one thing in the 15 years he lived on Magnolia Trace Drive. The storms were no joke. Season after season, water tore through the slope behind his yard like a runaway train. It carried mud, debris, and gallons upon gallons of rainwater straight into his garden. More than once, he and Denise had to bail out their basement with buckets because the runoff pushed its way under the door. Clinton wasn't the only one dealing with it either. He had watched his neighbor 2 doors down, Shirley Ramos, scramble to build makeshift trenches with cinder blocks just to keep her tomatoes from drowning. So Clinton did what he thought was both smart and necessary. He built a modest earthen dam at the edge of his property. Nothing fancy, just dirt, gravel, and a retaining wall that redirected the surge and slowed it down. It wasn't high enough to be dangerous, but it was strong enough to stop the chaos. For the first time in years, his backyard stayed dry, his garden thrived, and the basement floor didn't need mopping after every storm. Neighbors noticed. Some even thanked him quietly. Shirley brought over a peach cobbler and said, "Clinton, you've saved me this summer. My plants are finally surviving." Another neighbor, Frank Ellery, stopped him at the mailbox and said, "I don't know what you did back there, but it sure beats the mess we used to deal with." But not everyone saw it that way. The Homeowners Association had rules, pages and pages of them, buried in binders and PDFs that most residents never bothered to read. But Geraldine Kavanaugh, the HOA president, lived for those rules. A retired real estate broker in her late 60s, Geraldine prided herself on keeping Magnolia Trace orderly and attractive. She was known for sending notes about trash cans left out too long or garden flags that didn't match the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. To her, Clinton's dam wasn't a solution, it was an unauthorized alteration that threatened the uniform look of the subdivision. One humid Saturday morning, Geraldine appeared at Clinton's front door with a clipboard in hand. Denise happened to answer first. "Good morning, Mrs. Kavanaugh," she said politely, already sensing the tension. "I'll get straight to the point," Geraldine replied, her tone clipped. "Your husband has constructed something at the rear of your property that violates the association's landscaping regulations." Clinton stepped up behind his wife, crossing his arms. "It's not landscaping. It's protection. That dam is stopping water that nearly destroyed my basement last year." "That's not the issue, Mr. Dorsey," Geraldine said, pursing her lips. "Structures like that require HOA approval. You never submitted a request." "This isn't optional," Denise frowned. "So you'd rather our home flood again just because of paperwork?" Geraldine didn't flinch. "Rules are rules. If we let one homeowner do as they please, everyone will. Then what happens to property values?" Clinton held her gaze, calm but firm. "What happens to property values when half the houses on this street are waterlogged?" For a moment, Geraldine hesitated, but only for a moment. Then she shifted her weight, scribbled a note on her clipboard, and said, "You'll be hearing from the board." With that, she walked off the porch. Denise exhaled sharply, muttering, "She's going to make this ugly." Clinton shook his head. "She already has." But Clinton had no idea how far Geraldine was willing to take this, and that's where the real fight began. Magnolia Trace wasn't a fancy neighborhood, but it carried a kind of pride. Rows of two-story brick homes lined the winding streets, each with its own mailbox painted black to match the others. Yards were trimmed, driveways swept, and families often waved as they passed one another. People weren't rich, but they worked hard for what they had. Clinton liked it for that reason. Ordinary folks raising kids, saving for college, and trying to keep their homes looking decent. Still, like many neighborhoods with an HOA, there was an invisible line that divided the residents. Those who thought the rules protected them, and those who thought the rules controlled them. Clinton usually didn't care much about HOA business. He paid his dues, kept his lawn mowed, and minded his own. But Geraldine Kavanaugh? She was different. She wasn't just the president. She was the enforcer. After her husband passed away, she filled her days with neighborhood matters. Some people respected her for keeping things organized. Others whispered that she took the job too seriously. On Sunday mornings, when families headed to Mount Zion Baptist Church down the road or the smaller Presbyterian church near the park, Geraldine could be found walking Magnolia Trace with her clipboard. She checked gutters, fences, and even noted the types of flowers people planted. Once she fined a young couple because their shutters were painted a shade of blue not listed in the HOA palette. "Geraldine acts like she's running Buckingham Palace," Frank Ellery once told Clinton with a laugh. But beneath the joke, Clinton sensed real frustration. Clinton's wife Denise often said, "That woman isn't happy unless she's telling somebody what they can't do." And now, with the dam in question, Geraldine seemed to have found her biggest battle yet. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At the small playground near the subdivision's entrance, parents gossiped while kids climbed the jungle gym. "Did you hear about the dam?" one woman asked. "Apparently Geraldine's coming after Clinton." Another replied, "Honestly, I'm glad he built it. My yard doesn't flood anymore." But others weren't so supportive. "If he wanted to build something like that, he should have followed the rules," muttered a man named Trevor Langley, a mid-level accountant who always seemed more worried about resale values than people's lives. "If one person gets away with it, what's next? Sheds in the front yard?" Clinton overheard comments like these whenever he walked the neighborhood. He didn't like confrontation, but he also refused to be shamed for protecting his home. One evening, as he was rolling his trash bin to the curb, Shirley Ramos approached him. "Clinton, I just want you to know, I think what you did was smart. That storm last spring nearly washed out my whole vegetable bed. This year, not a drop. Don't let her bully you." He appreciated Shirley's support, but he also knew Geraldine had allies, and allies with power. The tension came to a head at the next HOA meeting, held in the subdivision's small clubhouse. Folding chairs filled the room, neighbors fanning themselves with printed agendas. Geraldine stood at the front, hair perfectly styled, glasses perched at the tip of her nose. Beside her sat two other board members, Janice Pruitt and Harold Green, who often followed her lead. Clinton took a seat near the back, arms crossed, trying to stay calm. Denise sat beside him, whispering, "Don't let her get under your skin." Geraldine began with announcements, trash pickup schedules, community yard sale dates, before moving briskly to unauthorized property modifications. Her voice sharpened. "We have received reports of a structure built on Mr. Dorsey's property. This construction was not submitted for review, nor approved by the board. It violates Section 8B of the landscaping guidelines." Clinton stood up before she could go further. "With all due respect, Mrs. Kavanaugh, that so-called structure is protecting my home and others around me. Everyone here knows the flooding we've dealt with." A murmur rippled through the room. Some nodded, others frowned. Geraldine adjusted her glasses. "Rules exist for a reason. If each homeowner does whatever they please, the character of this neighborhood will collapse." "That dam isn't hurting anyone," Clinton said firmly. "It's helping." "Ask Shirley." "Ask Frank. Ask anyone who lives downhill from me," Shirley spoke up, timid but clear. "He's right. My yard used to flood every time it rained. Since he built it, I've had no problems." Geraldine's expression stiffened. "This is not a matter of convenience. It's about procedure. We cannot allow exceptions." Denise leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Exceptions? You'd rather see people's homes ruined than admit this dam is useful?" The room grew tense. Geraldine tapped her pen against the podium. The board will deliberate. You will be notified in writing. Clinton sat back down, jaw tight. He had spoken his truth, but he could feel which way the wind was blowing. Geraldine wasn't budging. But Clinton didn't know the decision had already been made behind closed doors. The day after the meeting, Clinton walked to the back of his yard and stood at the dam, staring at it like it was an old friend under threat. It wasn't much to look at, just a carefully packed mound of earth reinforced with stones and a small retaining wall he'd built by hand. But to him, it represented peace of mind. It represented the nights he didn't have to stay up with towels pressed against the basement door. His son, Terrell, came out with a basketball tucked under his arm. "Dad, you think they're really going to make you take it down?" Clinton sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, son." "But Mrs. Kavanaugh, she doesn't let go of things easy." Terrell bounced the ball once against the patio and shrugged. "Seems dumb to me. You helped everybody. Why would anyone want to mess with that?" Before Clinton could answer, Shirley Ramos leaned over the fence, holding a basket of cucumbers from her garden. "You hear anything yet?" "Not yet," Clinton replied, "but I expect a letter soon." She handed him the basket. "Well, just know you've got people on your side. If they try to fine you, I'll speak up again." "Appreciate that," Clinton said with a tired smile. That afternoon, the letter came. A crisp white envelope with the HOA's letterhead. Inside, a violation notice, a $50,000 fine, and a demand that the dam be removed within 30 days. Denise read it aloud at the kitchen table, her voice trembling with disbelief. 50,000? Clinton, that's outrageous. That's more than we've got saved for Terrell's college fund. Clinton pressed his hands against his forehead. "They're trying to break me." That's what this is. The following week, neighbors began stopping Clinton in the street, some with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with open judgment. Frank Ellery caught him by the mailbox. "I heard about the fine, man." "That's insane. They can't expect you to pay that." "They can expect it," Clinton said bitterly. "Doesn't mean I can afford it." "You ought to fight it. Take them to court," Frank suggested. But another voice chimed in, Trevor Langley, standing nearby in his pressed polo shirt. "Court? For what? He broke the rules. We all signed the same bylaws when we moved in. Why should he get a pass?" Clinton turned to him slowly. "Because it was keeping your basement dry too, Trevor. Or did you forget the storm 2 summers ago when your carpet had to be ripped out?" Trevor bristled. "That's not the point. The point is, rules are rules." Clinton didn't bother arguing further. He walked back to his porch, his shoulders heavy, his wife's eyes following him with quiet worry. Later that night, Clinton and Denise sat at the kitchen table long after Terrell had gone to bed. Papers were spread out. Bills, savings account balances, letters from the HOA. "We could get a lawyer," Denise suggested, though her voice held little conviction. Clinton shook his head. "Lawyer fees alone would drown us before we even got to court. They know that. That's why they find people like this. They want to scare you into giving up." Denise reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "What are you going to do?" He looked down at their joined hands, then out the window where the dam sat, hidden in the dark. "What choice do I have? If we don't take it down, they'll put a lien on the house. We could lose everything." The next weekend, Clinton started dismantling the dam. It was slow, painful work. Each shovelful of dirt felt like undoing hours of protection he had built. Sweat dripped down his face as he pulled out the stones one by one, tossing them aside. Shirley watched from her fence, her face etched with disappointment. "This is wrong, Clinton. Everyone knows it's wrong. I don't have the money to fight them," he said quietly, barely lifting his eyes from the ground. Frank came over too, offering a hand with the heavy lifting. "I hate this man." "You don't deserve it." Clinton forced a tight smile. "Appreciate the help, but this is the only way to keep a roof over our heads." By sundown, half the dam was gone. Clinton stood on the muddy patch, shovel in hand, staring at what was left. He felt stripped, like something more than dirt had been taken from him. Denise walked out with 2 bottles of water. She placed one in his hand and whispered, "One day, they're going to regret this." Clinton didn't answer. but deep down, he feared she might be right. But neither of them realized just how soon that day would come. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, word about Clinton's fine had spread through every cul-de-sac. People who had never cared about neighborhood politics suddenly had an opinion. Some said Geraldine had gone too far. Others whispered that Clinton should have known better. Either way, the clubhouse that evening was packed tighter than it had been in years. Clinton didn't want to go. He told Denise, "What's the point?" They've already decided. Denise looked him straight in the eye. "The point is, if you're not there, they'll talk about you like you don't exist. At least let them see your face." So he went. He sat near the middle this time, not hiding in the back, not eager for the front row either. He wanted to be seen, but not cornered. Denise sat beside him, her hand gripping his arm for support. Terrell stayed home, too young for politics but old enough to know his father was carrying a burden. Geraldine stood at the front like always, papers neatly stacked in front of her, glasses perched low on her nose. She wore her favorite red blazer, the one she always brought out for important meetings. On her left was Janice Pruitt, quiet as usual, and on her right, Harold Green, who cleared his throat every few minutes, as if preparing to say something, but never did. After rattling off updates about landscaping contracts and the Neighborhood Watch program, Geraldine adjusted her glasses and said, "Next on the agenda. Enforcement of property modifications. Specifically, the matter concerning Mr. Clinton Dorsey heads turned." The air in the room thickened. Clinton rose before she could continue. "Look, I'm not going to drag this out. You all know why I built that dam. You've seen the storms. You've seen the flooding. For the first time in years, my basement stayed dry. And not just mine. Shirley's yard didn't flood. Frank's didn't either. I didn't build it to cause trouble. I built it to protect my home, and honestly, yours too." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Shirley raised her hand timidly. "He's right. That dam helped me. My cucumbers survived because of it." Frank chimed in louder. "I don't care what the rules say, Geraldine." The man was doing what needed to be done. $50,000? That's robbery. Geraldine tapped her pen sharply against the podium. "This is not about sympathy. This is about procedure. We cannot allow residents to build unauthorized structures, regardless of intent. Imagine the chaos if everyone started throwing up walls and dams. Property values would plummet." Clinton leaned forward, his voice steady but charged. "You keep talking about property values, Geraldine. But what happens when water runs through living rooms? You think buyers are going to pay top dollar for houses with flood damage?" That sparked more noise, some people agreeing, others siding with Geraldine. Trevor Langley stood up, his voice clipped. "Mr. Dorsey, with all due respect, you should have asked first. That's the way things work here. We all follow the same rules." Denise shot back. "He didn't have time to wait for one of Geraldine's committees. Our basement nearly collapsed last year. Were we supposed to sit around and let it happen again?" Janice Pruitt finally spoke up, her tone soft but firm. "The board is responsible for keeping standards. If we bend once, where does it stop?" Clinton turned toward her. "It stops when people use common sense, when they see a neighbor trying to stop a problem instead of making one." For a moment, silence fell. Neighbors looked back and forth between Clinton and the board. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Geraldine finally straightened her papers and said, "The decision has been made. The fine stands. The dam must be fully removed within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in legal action." A gasp ran through the crowd. Frank shook his head in disbelief. Shirley muttered under her breath, "This is madness." Clinton stayed standing, staring at Geraldine. He could feel his pulse hammering in his temples, but his voice stayed calm. "So that's it? Months of flooding, damage, sleepless nights, and you still want me punished for fixing the problem?" Geraldine's expression didn't change. "The rules are clear, Mr. Dorsey. We can't play favorites." Clinton let out a slow breath. "Then you're not protecting this neighborhood. You're protecting your clipboard." The room erupted. Some clapped, others groaned. Geraldine banged her gavel, demanding order. But the order was gone. The neighborhood was split, and everyone knew it. Denise tugged at Clinton's arm, whispering, "Let's go. You've said what you needed to." He walked out with her, the weight of $50,000 pressing on his back like a sack of stones. Neighbors called after him, some with support, some with judgment. But he didn't answer. As the door closed behind him, Frank muttered loudly enough for the board to hear, "One day you'll wish you had listened to him." But by then the storm clouds were already forming on the horizon. The letter stayed on the kitchen counter for days, its bold numbers staring back at the Dorseys like a taunt. $50,000. Clinton had read it enough times to memorize every line, the violation code, the payment instructions, the threat of legal action if he failed to comply. It wasn't just a fine. It was a message. Denise tried to stay calm for Terrell's sake, but late at night she would fold the letter and unfold it again, as if looking for some hidden loophole that wasn't there. "They can't possibly expect us to pay this," she whispered one night as they sat at the table, papers scattered around them. "They don't expect us to pay," Clinton said, rubbing his temples. "They expect us to bend." Terrell walked into the kitchen the next morning and saw the envelope lying open. "Dad, are we going to lose the house?" he asked quietly. Clinton looked at him for a long moment before answering. "No, not if I can help it. But it's going to be a fight." The fine became the talk of the subdivision. On Clinton's way to work, a neighbor he barely knew rolled down her window and said, "That's highway robbery. Don't let them push you around," but others, like Trevor Langley, made their stance clear. "You broke the rules, Clinton. If they let you slide, everyone else will start doing whatever they want." Clinton didn't bother responding. He just kept walking, his jaw set tight. At work, he had trouble focusing. His supervisor, Marcus Denton, pulled him aside after noticing his mistakes. "You okay, Clint? You don't seem like yourself." Clinton hesitated, then explained the situation. Marcus shook his head. "That's brutal. Man, sometimes these HOAs think they're above the law. Have you talked to a lawyer?" "I can't afford one," Clinton said. "They know that. That's why they slapped me with a fine I can't fight." Marcus sighed. "I've got a cousin who deals with real estate law. I'll get you his number. Maybe he can give you some advice without draining your bank account." That night, Clinton called the lawyer. The consultation was short and blunt. "They've got you cornered," the lawyer said over the phone. "The bylaws are airtight. Unless you can prove discrimination or selective enforcement, your best option is to comply. If you resist, they'll pile on legal fees and you could lose the house." Clinton thanked him, though the words felt bitter on his tongue. He hung up the phone and sat in silence, staring at the dam through the kitchen window. Denise placed a hand on his shoulder. "So what now?" he exhaled slowly. "Now, I tear it down." The next weekend, Clinton began dismantling the dam in earnest. He spent hours with a shovel, pulling apart what had taken him months to build. Dirt caked his boots, sweat stung his eyes, and with each stone he removed, he felt like he was peeling away his own protection, his own dignity. Neighbors stopped by. Some offered water, some offered sympathy. Shirley stood by her fence, arms crossed, tears in her eyes. "Clinton, this isn't right. You saved my garden, my whole yard, and this is how they repay you." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Frank showed up with work gloves and helped lift the heavier stones. "I'm telling you, man, Geraldine doesn't care about property values. She cares about control. She wanted to make an example out of you." Clinton paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. Well, she got what she wanted. By late afternoon, Terrell came outside, watching his father's shoulders slump with every shovelful. "Dad, I can help," he said, picking up a smaller shovel. Clinton shook his head. "No, son, go inside. This isn't work for you." But Terrell stayed, stubbornly digging alongside his father, even if his shovel barely made a dent. The sight of his son working beside him broke something in Clinton's chest. He wanted to protect his family from this fight, not drag them into it. Denise came out with water bottles, her voice soft but firm. "One day, she's going to regret this. All of them will." Clinton leaned on his shovel, breathing hard. He didn't respond, but in the pit of his stomach, he felt a storm brewing. Not in the sky, but in the neighborhood itself. But the real storm wasn't weeks away. It was closer than anyone realized. The dam was gone by the end of the month. What had once been a sturdy barrier was now just a muddy stretch of dirt and loose gravel, looking more like a scar than a yard improvement. Clinton stood there on the final evening, his shovel jammed into the ground, sweat clinging to his shirt. He had dismantled it stone by stone, layer by layer, until nothing remained of his effort. From the upstairs window, Denise watched her husband sink onto a lawn chair, silent and drained. She joined him outside with 2 cups of iced tea, setting one down on the small table. "It feels like they ripped something out of you," she said gently. Clinton sipped, staring into the backyard. "They did. Not just the dam. My pride, my right to protect my own home." Denise touched his arm. "You didn't lose your pride. You showed strength. You stood up for us, even when they tried to bury you." He gave a weak smile, but his eyes stayed dead on the muddy slope. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd let his family down. The next morning, as Clinton walked to his truck for work, he noticed Geraldine strolling down the street with her clipboard. She stopped at his driveway, smiling thinly. "Good morning, Mr. Dorsey." "I see you complied. That's good. The board appreciates your cooperation." Clinton tightened his grip on his keys. "I didn't cooperate. I gave in." Geraldine's smile didn't falter. "Sometimes giving in is the responsible thing to do." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this is about responsibility?" "No, Geraldine. It's about control. You wanted to prove you could break me, and you did. But you didn't fix the problem. When the next storm hits, don't say I didn't warn you." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. She just scribbled something on her clipboard and walked away. That night, Clinton sat at the dinner table with Denise and Terrell, the mood heavy. Terrell finally broke the silence. "Dad, why do we even live here if people treat us like this?" Denise shot her son a look, but Clinton answered calmly, "Because it's our home, because we built a life here, and because walking away now would mean they won." Terrell frowned. "Feels like they already did." Clinton sighed. "Maybe. But storms don't care about HOA rules. Nature has its own way of proving people wrong." The days turned into weeks. Summer heat gave way to the thick humidity of late August. With the dam gone, Clinton felt a gnawing anxiety every time dark clouds gathered. He walked his property line daily, checking the slope, watching for signs of erosion. Without the barrier, the ground seemed more fragile, more vulnerable. One Saturday, Frank stopped by, leaning against the fence. "I've been keeping an eye on the weather. They're saying we might get a nasty system this week. Could be one of those slow movers." Clinton nodded grimly. "Yeah, I've seen the forecast. All I can do now is pray it doesn't dump too much on us." Shirley joined them, holding a watering can. "This neighborhood's not ready. Without that dam, water's going to pour straight through here. Everyone knows it." Clinton wiped his brow. "Everyone except the board." Later that evening, Denise found him pacing the kitchen. "Clinton, you can't live like this, waiting for rain like it's a death sentence." "I'm not waiting for it," he said. "I'm expecting it." The storm came sooner than expected. On a Wednesday afternoon, the sky turned a sickly grey. By evening, rain hammered rooftops and gutters overflowed. The streets glistened under the downpour, water rushing toward the low-lying yards. Clinton stood at the back window, arms folded, watching the slope. Denise came up behind him. "It's happening, isn't it?" "Yeah," he muttered. "And it's just the beginning." The next morning, puddles dotted the neighborhood. Lawns were soggy, driveways slick with runoff. Kids splashed their way to the bus stop. But the forecast promised more rain. 2, maybe 3 more days of it. Clinton's stomach twisted with dread as he drove to work. By the 3rd night, the sound of rain was no longer soothing. It was suffocating. The ground was saturated, unable to hold another drop. Clinton checked the backyard at midnight, his flashlight beam catching streams of water sliding downhill, gathering speed. He whispered to himself, "This is it. This is the breaking point." But what Clinton feared most wasn't just the water in his yard. It was the water rushing toward every home that had trusted Geraldine's rules over his warnings. By Thursday, the rain had become relentless. Sheets of water lashed against windows, branches whipped in the wind, and the air smelled thick with mud and ozone. Magnolia Trace, usually so tidy and orderly, looked like it was unraveling. Mailboxes leaned under the weight of soaking soil, trash bins tipped in driveways, and gutters choked with leaves overflowed like small waterfalls. Clinton stood at his sliding back door, staring at the slope where the dam once stood. Water rushed downhill in fast, narrow streams, cutting grooves into the earth. It looked harmless at first, but Clinton knew better. Every inch of rain added weight and speed, every rivulet joined another, and soon those streams would be torrents. Denise came up behind him, clutching her robe tightly. "How bad is it?" He didn't look away. "Bad. And it's only the first night." Across the street, Frank was dragging sandbags from the trunk of his SUV. Clinton jogged over through the rain to help him. "You weren't kidding," Frank shouted over the roar of the storm. "This thing's a monster." Clinton grabbed a sandbag, slinging it against Frank's garage door. "The ground's too wet already. If it keeps up like this, we're in trouble." "Tell that to Geraldine," Frank muttered. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the rain soaking through their clothes. Then Shirley came running out of her house, umbrella flipping inside out in the wind. "Clinton! My backyard's turning into a swamp. It's pouring straight through where your dam used to be." Clinton followed her to the fence line. Water gushed into her yard, pooling around her garden beds, drowning the cucumbers she had proudly shown him just weeks before. Her face was pale, her voice frantic. "It's never been this bad this fast." "Because the dam's gone," Clinton said grimly. By Friday morning, the storm had turned violent. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled window panes, and the streets looked more like shallow rivers. Parents rushed kids into cars for school, feet splashing through ankle-deep water. Some gave up entirely, keeping their children home. Denise stood at the front window, her phone buzzing with weather alerts. "They're saying flash flood warnings are in effect through tonight." Terrell looked up from the couch. "Does that mean we should leave?" Clinton shook his head. "We'll be safer here. But we've got to be ready. Get the towels, the buckets, anything we can use if water comes in." The hours dragged. By evening, the rain had turned fierce again, hammering the rooftops like fists. Clinton walked the neighborhood with Frank, both carrying flashlights. Water rushed through storm drains so violently the grates rattled. Yards were flooded, gardens drowned, and small streams of water began seeping under garage doors. At Shirley's house, Clinton found her standing in rubber boots, her kitchen floor already wet. She looked at him with wide, panicked eyes. "It's coming in." "I can't stop it." He helped her move furniture onto chairs, but the water kept rising, inch by inch. Shirley pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "This never happened when the dam was here." Clinton wanted to say, "I told you so," but instead he laid a hand on her shoulder. "Just keep calm. We'll get through tonight." Back at his own house, Denise had towels stacked along the back door and buckets ready. Terrell had a flashlight in hand, his eyes darting between the windows. The house groaned under the weight of the storm, the sound of water slapping the siding unending. Clinton sat at the kitchen table, drenched from his walk. He dropped his flashlight and leaned forward, his elbows on the table, face in his hands. Denise poured him a cup of coffee, her hand shaking slightly as she set it down. "This is exactly what you warned them about," she whispered. He looked up, his face lined with exhaustion. "And they still don't get it." By midnight, the power flickered, then went out completely. The house plunged into darkness, the storm outside roaring louder without the hum of appliances to muffle it. Flashlights and candles lit up rooms in weak yellow glows. Through the window, Clinton saw water spilling across the street, sweeping over driveways, creeping closer to doorsteps. He could already picture what was coming. Basements filling, cars stalling, families scrambling. He turned to Denise and Terrell, his voice low and steady. "Stay close tonight. It's about to get worse." But no one in Magnolia Trace was prepared for how quickly worse was about to arrive. By dawn on Saturday, Magnolia Trace didn't look like a neighborhood anymore. It looked like a floodplain. The storm had refused to let up, pounding the subdivision with wave after wave of rain. Streets disappeared beneath rushing water, lawns turned into shallow lakes, and driveways were slick with mud. The smell of wet earth mixed with gasoline from stalled cars that had been abandoned overnight. Clinton stood at his front window, his jaw tight, watching the chaos spread. Across the street, Frank's sandbags had held for a while, but now water pushed around them, slipping through cracks and spilling into his garage. 2 houses down, Shirley's backyard was gone, completely swallowed under a sheet of brown water. Her vegetable garden, the pride she had nurtured all summer, was nothing but floating debris. Denise pulled back the curtain, her face pale. "Clinton, look at the Reynolds house." The Reynolds lived on the lowest part of the street. Water had already reached their porch, waves lapping against the steps. Their dog barked frantically from inside, the sound muffled by the storm. Mr. Reynolds was wading waist-deep in water, trying to carry sandbags that seemed laughably small against the flood. Clinton grabbed his raincoat. "I'm going over there." Denise caught his arm. "It's too dangerous. They need help," he said firmly, pulling free. Outside, the water was cold, rushing against his legs with surprising force. He slogged through, his flashlight beam cutting across the murky current. "You got to get upstairs," he shouted to Reynolds, who was soaked and shivering. Reynolds shook his head, clutching another sandbag. "If it gets in, everything downstairs is gone." "It's already gone," Clinton yelled back. "Save your family, not the carpet." For a second, Reynolds froze, then dropped the bag and nodded. He turned and ran inside, scooping up his barking dog as his wife and kids hurried up the stairs. Clinton fought his way back to his own house, every step heavier than the last. By the time he reached his porch, Denise was waiting with towels. She helped him inside, her hands trembling. "They're okay," he told her, "for now." But it wasn't just the Reynolds. Dozens of families were scrambling. Cars floated crooked in driveways, mailboxes leaned under the surge, and storm drains spat water back like geysers. The very system that was supposed to protect Magnolia Trace had collapsed. Inside their living room, Terrell pressed his face to the window. "Dad, it's everywhere." "It's like the street turned into a river." Clinton crouched beside him. "That's exactly what it is, son. A river with nowhere else to go." Meanwhile, Geraldine Kavanaugh was pacing her own living room, her clipboard abandoned on the counter. Water had already seeped into her pristine carpet, and she frantically stuffed towels against the door. Janice Pruitt's basement filled knee-deep before dawn, and Harold Green's brand-new SUV sat stalled in his driveway, water halfway up the tires. The neighborhood that had once prided itself on order and neatness was falling apart before their eyes. Around noon, a group of residents gathered on the higher ground near the clubhouse. Clinton trudged up the slope to join them. Faces were drawn, eyes wide with disbelief. Shirley clutched her soaked sweater around her shoulders, whispering, "I told them." "We all told them." Frank pointed to the flooded yards below. "This is exactly what the dam was stopping." "And now look." The crowd turned as Geraldine arrived, her shoes muddy, her red blazer drenched. She tried to speak with authority, but her voice wavered. "We'll contact the county. We'll request emergency drainage crews." Clinton stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "It's too late for that. The damage is already done. You wanted that dam gone. You wanted to make me the example. Well, here's your example." A murmur rippled through the group. Some nodded in agreement, others looked away, ashamed. Geraldine opened her mouth but found no words. She had preached rules for years, but now those same rules had left the neighborhood sinking. Clinton's clothes clung to him, heavy with rain and mud, but his voice was steady. "This wasn't about me. It was about protecting all of us. And now you're all paying for a decision that never should have been made." No one argued, not even Trevor Langley, who stood in the back with his arms crossed, staring at the flooded street in silence. The storm raged on, and as the water climbed higher, Magnolia Trace faced the truth together. The dam hadn't been the problem. Losing it had. But the aftermath would prove that the flood was only the beginning of the real reckoning. When the rain finally broke on Sunday morning, Magnolia Trace looked like a war zone. Water receded slowly, leaving behind mud, branches, and piles of debris that clung to fences and cars. Lawns were gouged with deep ruts where the current had carved through, flower beds buried under layers of silt. The air smelled of mildew and gasoline. Families stepped out of their homes like survivors emerging from bunkers. Some carried cameras to document the damage for insurance claims. Others simply stood on their porches, staring in disbelief at what had once been a clean, orderly subdivision. Clinton walked down Magnolia Trace Drive, boots squishing in the mud. Neighbors nodded at him as he passed. Not with judgment this time, but with something closer to respect, or maybe shame. Shirley hurried toward him, her sneakers caked with sludge. "Clinton, my whole kitchen floor is ruined. The cabinets are swelling already. I can't believe this happened." Her voice cracked. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I warned them, Shirley. We all did." A few houses down, Frank stood in his garage, tossing soaked boxes into a growing pile at the curb. "Lost half my stuff," he muttered when Clinton joined him. "Tools, camping gear, all destroyed. But hey, at least Geraldine kept her rules intact." His laugh was bitter, hollow. Clinton helped him haul out another box. Inside were old family photos, their corners curling from water damage. Frank stared at them, his jaw tight. "This neighborhood used to mean something to me. Now I can't even look at it the same way." As the day wore on, residents gathered in small clusters to talk. The same conversations repeated again and again. Insurance claims, cleanup costs, frustration with the HOA. Geraldine eventually showed up near the clubhouse, her usual confidence gone. Her blazer was gone too, replaced by a raincoat stained with mud. She cleared her throat and tried to address the crowd. "We'll need to coordinate with the county for cleanup efforts. I'll contact emergency services." But she was cut off by a voice from the back. "Save it, Geraldine!" someone shouted. "This is on you!" Others joined in. "You forced him to take down the dam! You cared more about bylaws than our homes!" Geraldine's face tightened. "We followed procedure." Frank stepped forward, his voice booming. "Procedure doesn't keep water out of my garage. That dam did. And you tore it down." All eyes turned to Clinton, standing quietly among the group. He hadn't planned to speak, but the silence pressed on him until he did. This flood wasn't just nature, it was neglect. You had a chance to listen, and instead, you punished me. Now look where we are. The crowd murmured in agreement. Even Trevor Langley, who had defended the rules at every turn, stood with his arms crossed, saying nothing. Geraldine looked from face to face, searching for support, but found none. Her authority, once unquestioned, now felt paper-thin. Later that afternoon, Clinton returned home to find Terrell and Denise dragging ruined carpet out of the basement. Denise wiped her forehead, streaking it with dirt. "The water got about 6 inches high. Could have been worse, but it's still a mess." Clinton grabbed one end of the carpet and helped haul it to the curb. "We'll fix it. We'll rebuild. But they can't keep doing this to us." That evening, the neighborhood held an impromptu meeting near the clubhouse. This time, Geraldine didn't preside at the podium. Residents stood in a circle, muddy and exhausted, their clothes smelling of mildew and rain. People vented. About costs, about insurance, about being ignored. Finally, Frank turned to Clinton. "You should speak for us." "You were the only one who saw this coming." Clinton shook his head. "I don't want to run an HOA. "It's not about running it," Shirley insisted. "It's about making sure people like Geraldine don't ruin it again. We need someone who'll listen, not just enforce." Clinton looked around the circle. Faces met his with expectation, desperation even. For the first time since the flood began, he felt the weight shifting. Not just onto him, but toward him. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "I'm no politician. I'm just a man who wanted to protect his home. But if you want me to stand up for common sense, for fairness, then I'll do it. Not for me. For all of us." The circle erupted in quiet applause, tired hands clapping, voices murmuring support. Geraldine stood at the edge, her face pale, her clipboard dangling uselessly at her side. But Clinton knew this wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning of rebuilding both the neighborhood and the trust that had been washed away. In the days that followed, Magnolia Trace became a neighborhood of tarps, dehumidifiers, and insurance adjusters. Pickup trucks lined the streets, their beds filled with ruined carpet, warped furniture, and boxes of soggy belongings. Piles of debris sat at the edge of driveways like monuments to the storm's destruction. Clinton worked shoulder to shoulder with his neighbors, hauling, scrubbing, and sweeping. He helped Shirley rip out her swollen kitchen cabinets, lent Frank his shop vacuum for waterlogged corners, and checked on the Reynolds kids while their parents met with contractors. It wasn't about favors anymore. It was survival, and survival required everyone to pull together. Geraldine, however, was nowhere to be seen. She kept to her house, curtains drawn, phone calls ignored. For years, she had been the voice of authority. Now, she was a ghost. One evening, a week after the rain had stopped, neighbors gathered again outside the clubhouse. This time there were no folding chairs, no podium, no gavel, just men and women standing in a loose circle, wearing work clothes streaked with mud, their faces tired but determined. Frank spoke first. "We can't let this happen again. If we don't make changes, the next storm will ruin us completely," Shirley added. "We need leadership that puts people over paperwork." All eyes turned to Clinton. He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his palms together. "I'm not the kind of man who craves power," he said. "But I do care about this place. My family lives here, just like yours, and I can't stand by while rules matter more than roofs, while control matters more than safety." A murmur of agreement rose from the group. Denise stepped forward, her voice steady. Clinton never asked to be the example, but he was, and what happened to him happened to all of us. If you want someone to speak for you, to fight for common sense, then you already know who that person is. Clinton looked at her, then at Terrell, standing tall beside her. He thought about the dam, about the nights spent building it, about tearing it down with his son by his side. He thought about the storm, the neighbors wading through water, the fear in Shirley's eyes, the bitterness in Frank's voice. Finally he nodded. "All right. If you want me to step up, I will. Not as president, not as some dictator with a clipboard, but as a neighbor who knows what it feels like to be ignored. If we do this, we do it together." Applause broke out, not loud or celebratory, but steady and heartfelt, the kind that carried weight. Even Trevor Langley, who had argued against him from the start, clapped with a reluctant smile. As the crowd dispersed, Geraldine appeared at the edge, her blazer wrinkled, her hair disheveled. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I only did what I thought was best for the neighborhood." Clinton turned to her, his tone firm but not cruel. "What's best for a neighborhood isn't always in a binder, Geraldine. Sometimes it's in the people who live there, who know the ground, who feel the rain when it comes down. You forgot that. And we all paid the price." She lowered her gaze, and for the first time, she had no answer. Weeks later, cleanup was still ongoing, but something had changed. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now borrowed each other's tools, shared meals, and traded stories of repairs. The flood had stripped away the neat facade of Magnolia Trace, but in its place, it revealed a community bound by hardship. Clinton often walked the slope where his dam once stood. He didn't rebuild it, at least not yet. Instead, he worked with his neighbors to push for county engineers to improve drainage, this time with full community support. When the petitions were drafted, every resident signed, even Geraldine. One evening, standing on his porch, Clinton looked out over the street. Kids played basketball in the wet driveways. Adults chatted with rakes and shovels in hand. Denise slipped her arm around his waist. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah. It's different now." Stronger Terrell joined them, dribbling his basketball. "So, you think we'll be ready when the next storm comes?" Clinton smiled faintly. "We'll be ready. Because this time, we're not fighting each other. We're fighting together." And that was the lesson Magnolia Trace carried forward. Rules may matter, but people matter more. When disaster comes, it isn't bylaws or fines that hold a neighborhood together. It's compassion. It's listening. It's the courage to stand up even when you're standing alone. So if you're watching this, remember Clinton's story. Don't ignore the voices that warn of danger. Don't silence the ones who see what others refuse to. Because sometimes The very person you try to tear down is the one holding the line for everyone else. If you believe stories like this carry lessons we all need to hear, make sure you subscribe for more.